You know, because budget, our budget rarely gets questions. It's everything else. So I don't try to always obviously, the question is come from someone probably overwhelming.
Yes, that's so true.
So it's just hard.
It is. You just never know what
Is there time for something kind of related
it was ladies. It wasn't just you. Trying to make it.
Yeah. He's laying the ground.
No, I don't think.
Well, it's not. You're done. Handle that for every year. Say it like that.
Yeah.
You know,
But.
that's their trustee. 100% support that. They 100% say it's. They're sure to say
Yeah.
that. Yeah, that's kind of more important than anything. Because they have. Yeah. But I say what's the job you're taking?
So it's vice chancellor of finance. Everybody. Yeah, I live just west of Martinsville.
Okay.
So I'm like north of Martinsville, like 10 minutes north of Martinsville. So it's like
The campus is like on 46 and then like less than 37.
Yeah, it's right next to
One of my daughters went down there, so that's cool. It's a nice campus.
yeah. Yeah, so it's just we have to
Yeah.
I don't know how chill.
Because I mean,
No.
I never heard two people. I can split it. Oh, yeah.
Public service.
Yeah.
right, you're like. All right, it is 9 o'clock. Let us commence this meeting of Indiana Deferred Compensation Committee for November 14th, 2024. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, everyone. We appreciate you all joining us here and over the technology. We'd like to open up with a call to order. Nancy Marsh, are you here?
I am here.
All right. Diane Kinsworthy Blythe, you here?
Present.
Joe Haybig
Yep, present.
and Mike Frick.
Present.
Thank you. We will now have the reading of the live streaming disclaimer. Susan?
Capital Cities LLC is an investment advisor registered under the Investment Advisors Act of 1940. The content of this presentation is provided for informational purposes only and is not to be relied or acted upon as a recommendation or investment, legal, or tax advice of any kind to any viewer through electronic media. This presentation also may contain forward-looking statements which are based on the beliefs of and information available to Capital Cities management. Actual results could differ materially from those expressed in or implied by these forward-looking statements. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Capital Cities does not control the website or domain or on which this presentation is stored and disclaims any responsibility for any information, services, or products found on websites linked to the page on which this presentation is stored. The unauthorized use of this content of this presentation without the express written consent of Capital Cities is strictly prohibited.
Thank you. We will now have the approval for the meetings or the minutes of our meeting from August 15th of this year. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve those minutes.
All right. And is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We do not have an administrator's report this quarter, so we will move right to the investment manager presentation. And I would like to welcome with us today. Please come join us. State Street serves as our passive funds investment manager, including our target date funds, S&P 500 Index Fund, Russell Small Mid Cap Index Fund, and U.S. Inflation Bond Index Fund. As fiduciaries, it is prudent to review State Street's investment stewardship, corporate engagement, and proxy voting policies, given the important role State Street serves in our investment menu. State Street will review these topics with us along with discussing their investor voting choice program. As you may recall, we invited Jerry Boyer to present at our August committee meeting after learning more about Boyer Research's approach to proxy voting, of which he demonstrated during the discussion particular skepticism toward ESG, including concerns about prioritizing issues over fiduciary duty. We continue to explore our options with State Street and Boyer, and ideally would like to take a more active role in proxy voting processes. Hoosier Start offers mutual funds and collective investment trusts, which means our assets are commingled with other investors, and the investment managers have the responsibility of voting proxies for the underlying securities. With that, I turn it over to you, Mary and Michael. Thank you for being with us here today. And we look forward to learning more about your policies and our options.
And State Street's presentation is behind tab 1 of Capital Cities packet for you.
Thank you, Comptroller Nishella, and thank you to the board for inviting us here today. We will take the next 20 minutes or so to go through our stewardship and proxy voting and the choices you have as a client of ours. Thank you very much for your business. I'm not going to touch on every page in the deck. I'm just going to reference them. And if there are any particular questions on what you see, I'm happy to answer them. But pages 4 and 5 are the schedule of your assets under management, which again, total just about 850 million. So thank you very much for your partnership with us. We truly appreciate your business in the 3 core funds. And then the target date funds, which are made up of underlying commingled funds to get you to your retirement glide path. And all of our funds are tracking as expected. You are in the lowest share class offering for your size. So your participants are realizing a great cost benefit for their retirement assets. Page 12, just to, Comptroller mentioned a collective investment trust. It's a bank commingled fund. We're the subsidiary of State Street Corporation based in Boston. And our ERISA collective investment trusts allow us to provide low cost retirement asset management. We're able to cross trades, so there's no impact going to the market. They're not a registered fund, so you have fewer cost administration as you do to a mutual fund, which allows us to pass on the low cost savings I mentioned. And lastly, about 2 years ago now, we rolled out our investor voter choice program, which allows our clients to choose a proxy voting policy other than that of State Street Global Advisors. We've got certain categories, which we've shared with the group, but you've all engaged with Boyer Associates, and we've been happy to engage with Jerry and his team to see if we can get this on the ISS. We can use it on the ISS platform to vote. So we're in the process of working with the comptroller's team and Boyer Associates very closely to have that be a possibility if that's something. And then you would be able to fill out some paperwork and choose the Boyer policy to vote your proxies. So, but in the meantime, while we're working through that, my colleague Michael Ann Deberhan is going to share our proxy voting policy and the process and our asset stewardship program and how we go about this, and then the voter choice program as well that exists today without Boyer on it. If there are any other questions or any questions, I can pass it on to Michael. Okay. Over to you.
Thank you, Mary. So I will start on slide 14. So this is, so I represent our sustainable investing and asset stewardship team. This is a group that is comprised of about 45 individuals at SSGA. It's a growing group. So we've been increasing the resources we have in order to make sure that we are touching on all of the various engagements that we want to have with companies, but also the proxy voting solutions as well. We've recently hired an EMEA, that's Europe, Middle East, and Africa head of asset stewardship. So she's based in London. And we've also recently hired someone for APAC based in Singapore. Part of the philosophy there is we want to have boots on the ground closer to those companies in order to engage with those companies and really understand their operations. So it's a very it's a long-term investment that we're putting into this group, and we continue to add resources. And really the main goal here is to make sure that we're pursuing long-term value consistent with fiduciary responsibilities for us. Very important for us is that we are what we call the universal owner. Essentially, we own stakes in nearly every company that's publicly traded. So our approach is that we don't have the kind of the luxury of divesting or selling out of a company based on the way they're operating. We hold these companies in perpetuity. And so these engagements are really designed to, enhance the long-term value for our clients across the globe. Secondly, the principles that we have on the next slide is slide 15. And, if you were to describe our asset stewardship approach as well as proxy voting into essentially three main categories, it would really be these categories. The first is effective board oversight. So as shareholders, we elect the board of directors. The board of directors in turn hires management CEO to manage the company. So we are essentially having the board of directors dictate policy across these companies. So we don't want to micromanage these companies. That's really not our role as fiduciaries. We're electing these board of directors to manage those companies effectively. And so really we're overseeing the board, and those in turn are overseeing these companies. So in terms of effective board oversight, things like board independence, we want to make sure that the board of directors are, acting independent of the CEO as well as those companies and really acting on behalf of shareholders. So things like, having, good representation, board oversight in terms of like the skill set that the board brings to these companies. That's really important as well. And then in terms of director time commitment, this is something that is becoming a lot more important for us fairly recently. So for example, in the latest year, we've been asking companies to disclose the amount of time that their boards are making to other boards that they may be members of. Part of the goal there is we don't want board members to be overextended. So if you have a board member that's sitting on 4 different company boards, for us, that's a sign of potential overstretching for those board members, and so we're asking for more disclosures in that context. The second is around disclosure. So these are all on slide 15. Disclosure for us is very important. As again, fiduciaries, we want these companies to disclose pertinent risks and opportunities for us to make informed decisions as stakeholders. So a lot of what we ask for companies is to disclose things that we think are financially relevant for those industries. So energy companies, for example, things around climate disclosure is important for us. Across most companies, the workforce, makeup of the workforce or the makeup of the board is also important. So a lot of these disclosures are really designed to help us as fiduciaries understand kind of the structure of these companies and make pertinent decisions. And then finally, shareholder protection. So this is a very key, important stakeholder assessment for us. The concept of one share, one vote, for example, is very important, as well as the ability for us to elect board members. So, signs of, best practices there is the ability to elect board members on an annual basis as opposed to a staggered basis, because that holds boards accountable to the actions of those shareholders. So those are really kind of the three core principles of how we engage with companies, as well as our proxy voting approach. If we move further, slide 16 talks a bit about our approach through thought leadership, engagements, and voting. So first, with thought leadership, our goal here is to really provide an overarching view of our stewardship activities. So every year, for example, we have a report that shows every company that we've voted on behalf of, every company that we've engaged with, and really just to provide our stakeholders with an assessment of our fiduciary role for them. So this annual report also includes what we call vote bulletins. Essentially, when there's a shareholder resolution, typically we'll assess those resolutions and then we'll vote. But we've been getting increased questions on kind of the rationale for some of these votes. So we'll include these bulletins on kind of major newsworthy votes that have come up, just to share kind of the rationale based on our global proxy voting policy and assess how those votes really manifested themselves. Secondly, is around engagement. So sort of the two core responsibilities we have is both to vote those proxies, but to engage with those companies. Essentially, engagement means, we're reaching out to those companies or they're reaching out to us, And we're understanding kind of the way their companies are operating in terms of kind of broad engagement campaigns. So for example, we'll have typical engagements if there's a specific vote that's coming on the proxy ballot. And so we'll reach out to those companies to understand a bit more about those ballot initiatives and really to understand, how we'll vote, but based on those. But then off season, so outside of what we call the proxy voting season, which is typically the first few months of the year, we'll engage with companies on various topics. We've got a list that we'd be happy to share with you, but those are really discussions around how those companies are operating, both in current environment, but also in future environments as well. And again, that's part of our role, is to really understand how those companies are operating. And then finally, the last is our voting. Again, these are both management proposals as well as shareholder proposals, and then kind of the annual kind of voting cycle, which typically happens at the start of the year.
Any questions for Michael thus far?
I've got one. Yeah.
Mhm.
Could you just give us some examples of these campaign various themes?
Mhm.
So things that would be financially material risk that you would be looking out for.
Sure. Actually, we have a few of those on slide 17. So these are, a few of the kind of the high level campaigns that we've had both ongoing over the number of years, but also more recently. So one example I'll point to, which is fairly recent, is the risks and opportunities related to emerging technologies. Sort of a long way of saying, what are the risks and potential pitfalls of AI, both in terms of how companies are using AI in their own operations, and then how AI is impacting their stakeholders as well. So some of these themes are around the potential risks. So for example, generative AI, there may be potential risks of various biases in these systems. And so because it's an emerging risk, we want to understand how companies are using this technology in terms of their operations. It may not manifest itself today in potential risks and opportunities, but we think that's something that could manifest itself in the future. And so that's one where, we're consistently thinking about, how that could impact companies. Another one, one that we get typically is around climate transition plans. So this is something that we don't mandate that companies have a transition plan, but when they do, many of them have adopted, for example, either net zero targets or things around a science-based target for these climate transition plans. So if they do outline these plans, we want to, understand some of the disclosures that are a part of their transition plans. So there's various frameworks out there. One which we typically refer to as the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. It's essentially a set of disclosures that companies have agreed to abide by. So for us as investors, we want to understand, kind of an apples to apples comparison of how these transition plans compare to each other. So that's one where, we've seek more disclosure in those areas. So in many of these cases, we're seeking to understand, but also disclose these risks, as opposed to having companies dictate the operations of those companies.
May I ask for clarification? What risks are you referring to?
So with in specifically to climate? Yeah. So in terms of climate, some of these risks relate to either the operations of those companies, perhaps where they're located. So for example, we've gone through, pretty rigorous hurricane season over the last few years. So part of understanding those risks is, do you have operations of, do you have warehouses or operations in areas that may be prone to flood risk or hurricane risk? So as investors, we want to understand that, because that could manifest itself in the future in potentially lower returns because of the costs associated from these potential hurricanes or other natural disasters. So part of understanding those risks is, where are you potentially vulnerable to some of these risks that are manifesting themselves. And as fiduciaries, we want to understand how that may impact your business. So that's one example, at least on the climate transition area.
Any other questions or comments at this point? All right, I'd like to make one more comment.
Sure.
Related to the purpose of net zero.
Mhm.
We here in the state of Indiana are in need of energy and are running short of it.
Mhm.
And are very compelled to have an all of the above approach and to get fully behind coal, natural gas, fracking, the small nuclear module development of that and seeing what promise of safe energy that might hold for us. So the goals of net zero are not aligned with that, and that is of great concern. And just the perpetuation of furthering the advancements in, clean technology to pair with, the centuries of natural resources that we have right below our feet in this country. So I wanted to express that as a point of concern when we're speaking of that big picture and our priorities. My priorities.
Yeah, no, thank you, Comptroller. And that's, I think that's, I think a clear indication. And we wanted to reiterate that our approach is that we're not dictating net zero, or we're not asking companies to come up with net zero aligned targets. But in the event that they do, we just want to understand how those are pertinent and how those are manifesting themselves in their operations. In another area, we do have clients in other regions that are attaining net zero through their investments. And so part of our role is to provide choice for those investors if that's something that they seek. But our approach when we look at all the companies that we own is that we don't have sort of that net zero agenda. We're asking them to disclose the risks that are pertinent, but are not sort of putting that as an agenda item to how they're running their companies. So that's.
Thank you. Would you say that that is a change in the approach of State Street as far as advocating for net zero, those types of initiatives versus now not pushing it because of that bigger picture? Would that be a change on your part, would you say?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's a change. Our approach has always been around sort of disclosing these risks. So one example fairly recently is that we exited a group called Climate Action 100. But part of that was because the goals of Climate Action 100 had changed from sort of a disclosure-based framework to one that was a bit more kind of action oriented. So that's a change that we made, but it was consistent with how we've always approached these frameworks, which is it in the best interest of our role as, essentially index managers where we're owning every company. So the disclosure part, we still continue to agree with, and that's why we align with that. But in terms of the way we've operated our company and the way we've engaged with companies, that essentially has not changed. But if other forces outside of that do change, that we just have to reassess that, and based on our.
We've never been a divestment
We've never,
approach
yeah.
firm. It's been all around the disclosures of what they are doing. And we do have a broad client base with varying needs around this topic. So thus the rollout of investor choice, and we do everything we can to provide our global clients what they need in this area.
That's right.
Thank you.
Because I respectfully understand.
Thank you.
Indiana has a different need than
Mhm.
Georgia or the UK or something, so we get it. It's not always easy, but we are here to partner with you to do what we can to allow you to voice your voice. Your choice.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? All right, I have one more. So in Indiana, we have legislation that stated that our public retirement system needed to be completely divested from any connection to Chinese entities. And I also serve on the board of IMPERS, and we leaned into that. The legislature gave us 5 years in which to do so. We accomplished it in 1 year's time. We on this board at our last meeting leaned into the spirit of that legislation and voted to divest from a menu item where there was a 4% interest in Chinese entities. Could you speak to that situation as it relates to China and investments there and how that would interplay with our situation?
From a client perspective, I work with InPers as well, so it was part of
Yes.
that with the account we run for them. Public record. We do have some funds that are ex-China. We are seeing some clients require it in more than one state, or just the preference of some people aren't divesting necessarily, but are separating it out as its own investment so they can control it a little better. There's the ability to go ex-China. In our funds at SSJ, we don't have them set up on the defined contribution front yet, but we are looking at it as we get requests. So that'd be something we could continue to engage with Tiffany and you all on. I mean, there's the ability to do it if we get interest, basically.
We currently do not have a passive international equity fund that would have China exposure, but we do have some small China exposure within our target date funds, given the international exposure that are within those funds.
So you're saying that would be something that you could work with us?
We can, yes, we have,
Sort through that and get
I
out of
don't,
that.
I mean, we need to investigate it.
Yes.
But we have had other defined contribution clients express asking if we have defined contribution commingled funds that are ex-China. We haven't opened them yet, but we can continue to investigate that.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Any other comments there?
No, I agree.
Okay, so
Okay.
let's look at that for the next meeting. How about that?
Okay.
Does that sound good?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. We can make just a few more comments on sort of the stewardship activities over the last few years and sort of the first half of 2024. So on slide 19, again, you want to illustrate, how our, proxy voting policies have manifested themselves in terms of these various categories. And so what you're seeing here is SSGA's votes against directors over time and sort of the rationale across the bottom there. So the scale here on the left, fairly low numbers. So for independents, we voted against about 4.5 or so of directors in the first half of 2024. Part of the rationale here for independents, again, it goes back to, having, an independent board act as kind of the managers for us as shareholders. And so having, again, the separation of CEO and chairman, for example, is a key tenet of corporate governance. So that's a sign of independence. We see director time commitment that I mentioned earlier. So on the fourth column there, you can see there's a spike in votes against these company directors. Part of the rationale, again, is when we, lay out our proxy voting policy, we, specifically engage with companies, we make it very public and they understand sort of the expectations. And then over time, if we don't see sort of changes or improvements in certain areas, that's when we'll vote against. So in director time commitment, those are examples where you may have a board member that sits on 4 other boards or 3 other boards. Again, we think that the time commitment is important. So we lay out those expectations and then we vote against if we don't see changes there. So that's why you see a bit of a spike in that category.
Any questions or comments here? All right, I have another one.
Sure.
All right, under gender diversity and DEI.
Mhm.
And I'm speaking for myself here as one member of this board. In our office, we have been clinging tightly to MEI, merit, excellence, and intellect. And as far as priorities along those lines, I personally am very interested in seeing the elevation of those items, of those qualities. And I think we're seeing some natural momentum that's coming back into that area. And could you speak to that?
Sure. So in terms of the way we evaluate sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just board diversity in general. So different different markets have, I'd say, varying practices. So in the US, for example, or UK, we've certainly seen more diversity at the board level. So a few years ago, we've launched a campaign called the Fearless Girl Campaign, essentially advocating for more diversity of gender diversity at these board levels. It's not to say that it's not going against merit, but we see that there has been research. Again, a lot of what we try to do is based on kind of empirical research. So there's been studies by McKinsey and others where increased levels of gender diversity at the board level or management level typically leads to better outcomes. And so for developed markets, that's a policy that we've had in place for a few years to increase the number. Again, we're not asking for parity. We're not asking for 50-50. In certain markets, we're asking for 30% for gender diversity. Globally, we recently initiated at least one female board member. And again, for certain markets, that's not market practice. So we continue to engage with those companies. But part of it is both to continue, I think the merit, which Comptroller, you certainly emphasize, which should be kind of the main criteria. But certainly we think that having some level of gender diversity in these markets makes sense. And, we think that should lead to at least better outcomes, at least better kind of decision making at these boards to have kind of different voices in the room.
So did I hear you mention McKinsey?
McKinsey, yeah.
McKinsey.
McKinsey.
And
yeah.
what is McKinsey?
McKinsey is a global consultancy. They have various studies that they've done on kind of gender diversity at companies.
And are you, in your role, are you pushing for certain quotas or giving points for meeting certain goals in that area? Could you describe that for us?
Yeah. Our approach is not quota based. So we have a target for developed markets of 30%, which is I wouldn't call that a quota. It's sort of a target that we assess with companies. And then again, part of those engagement campaigns is really speaking to those companies, understanding their practices to see if this is, they may be laying out other priorities across maybe their management company as well as their board. So part of it is not having sort of a quota and then just voting against companies based on that quota, but really, understanding those companies, engaging with those companies, and really, having that back and forth dialogue. So I wouldn't necessarily call it a quota.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments?
Great. I think that's probably in terms of stewardship activities. We include a few slides in the back. Slide 20 is a quick snapshot of voting on shareholder proposals for both for environmental and social related. You can see, somewhat of a decline from 2020, where we had about 22% of shareholder proposals that we voted on in favor, to 14% and then 6% in the first half of 2024. So a lot of this, I'd say generally speaking, there's been a lot more shareholder proposals being put forth that tended to be much more prescriptive or asked for companies to take certain actions. Going back to our role as fiduciary, part of our goal is to really understand how those companies are operating, but not dictate how they operate. And so we've declined or we voted less in favor of those proposals over time, as we've seen sort of the quality of those proposals sort of decline over time as well.
Could you give us some information on the topics of those proposals?
Sure. So in some cases, for two energy companies, there was a request to both phase out certain areas of development. So again, that's one of those areas that I mentioned earlier where we do not advocate, how those companies operate. We really advocate for those disclosures. So in the cases of those two companies, we declined to support those proposals. And then lastly, we've talked a bit about investor voting choice, but just to give you a quick kind of snapshot of where this program started at the end of 2022 is really a kind of a goal to provide more access and more choice for investors in our funds. So we really launched with sort of a pilot, really small portion of our equity assets under management, and it's actually grown pretty rapidly since then. So as of today, about 80% of our equity index assets are eligible for the program. When we first launched the program, it was just the options from ISS. Now, clearly, we're speaking to Boyer and others where we want to increase kind of access for other proxy solutions for clients. Again, part of this is really to provide our clients the ability to exercise their role if they would seek to have that fiduciary role of voting their own shares. So we're continuing to expand it. I'd say in a year's time, we would expect more assets to be eligible. In fact, we're targeting a larger number by the end of this year. And over time, perhaps seeing more proxy advisors as a part of that program as well.
Thank you.
And the policies themselves are on 24. I believe you've looked into them, and I know you're interested in Boyer, and hopefully that works out. If not, you've got the options on page 24 that we could look at as well. If there's something that's more aligned with your values and goals, it's not maybe exactly what you want, but it might get you closer to what you want. Are there any questions for myself or Michael?
As far as an update on where the discussions are with Boyer, do we have one of you all will provide that up?
Sure. Boyer Research reached out yesterday and let us know that they have made a request to ISS, the proxy voting service, to see if they would allow certain particular states, like Indiana, to use their guidelines. And we are awaiting a response on ISS, or he is.
So we will keep you posted.
Excuse me, just to clarify though, State Street is already part of the ISS, is already utilizing that tool, correct?
No, so that's maybe perhaps that's kind of a misconception. So we use ISS services in terms of their research, but we have our own voting proxy voting policy.
Okay.
So everything that happens in terms of the votes that we make are based on our own policy.
Gotcha.
We just subscribe to some of their research for just understanding kind of the different ballot items. Yeah.
So how would using the ISS proxy voting, what effect would that have for the committee and for the fund members?
So essentially, what would happen is ISS, based on some of those different parameters. So for example, I believe there was a sustainability policy or an SRI policy. So they would lay out sort of the rules for each of those policies of voting for or against certain items, and then automatically those votes would apply to those policies. So it's based on those specific guidelines that they've drafted for each of these. And then essentially when a vote comes up, they check it on the guidelines. Does it either yay or nay? And then it kind of votes alongside that versus the current policy that we have, which is our own voting policy. And we base it on kind of our assessment. But these
24.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
these are the ISS ones. Yeah.
Not the State Street.
Not the State Street ones. Yeah.
Your funds are currently being voted to the State Street Global Advisor proxy voting
So we
policy.
get on page 24, those are 8 voting policies that we could possibly choose from.
Right,
That's
outside of ours.
outside of
Briefly
ours.
looking at this number 4 would be something I think, that tries to fulfill our statutory and common law obligations. And, so if we wanted to go that direction, I think we could specify our preference,
I see. These are options.
how you would
for
vote
us to
on our
choose
behalf.
from.
That's
Right.
correct.
These are options that ISS excuse me, has in their toolkit that you can pick. And then some folks like Boyer, and there's some other companies out there that have different policies
Mhm.
that we're working to also get on the ISS platform menu, so to speak, in addition to the 8 that have been defined by ISS. And we've worked with them to try to get, folks that want a more board aligned and don't want an active, voice like by the investment manager. We've worked to try to get like the board aligned and board, I know you don't always necessarily maybe agree with the board, but at least it's voting like the company votes. It's not us putting our view on. Do you know what I mean? So we've tried to get, I think 7 and 8 possibly are newer
Those are
in the
newer.
choice program.
That's correct. Yeah.
We started with the 1 through 6, I think, were the ones that when we started the program almost 2 years ago were available. So we get it. We understand everybody has different views and we want to have as much choice for you as possible because everybody does have a different view. So that's where we're at.
Thank you.
Okay, well, if there isn't anything else, we thank you very much for your conversation and your time and your partnership and we'll be in touch.
Thank you
All right.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now we will have our third-party administrators report from Nationwide, Michael Burkhart and Evan Mitchell. And your guests.
So we're going to begin today with my portion of the presentation. So thinking of the future start. That the report. We're going to note that the first cover, right inside the first cover, you'll see the quarterly. From a participant education and service perspective, we've had 937 site visits quarter to date. 64% of those have been with state agencies, so they're meeting with the state agency personnel. We have 337 political subdivision site visits, and 74% of those have been in person. So our retirement specialists are engaging with your people in person, usually where they work. So they're making it as convenient as possible. While we and the participants value in-person presentation, we do have the capability. We are very effective in a virtual setting as well. So we can do all sorts of site reviews, account reviews virtually, just like we can in person, but we do value in person. Hoosier Star provides educational webinars throughout the year. Quarter to date, we've had 37 educational webinars that we've performed. The average attendance is 30. 90% of those are with state employees. We do calculate if you're with a state employee or with a political subdivision. And we're currently on pace for 55 educational events by the year end. Some key messaging that our retirement specialists utilize when they're meeting with participants is, of course, we're having a constant message of adding, updating beneficiaries. We are promoting the My Interactive and Retirement Planner for managed account users and contribution increases. And ongoing, we're going to be talking about the new My Income and Retirement Planner as well. And we're also educating people on the value of Roth versus pre-tax and how it fits into their retirement perspective. From a plan sponsored outreach, we've had 16 total new adoptions, and that translates into 322 new enrollments from the political subdivisions and over $2.4 million of assets that participants are using towards their retirement savings. So do you have any questions of participant education and service?
I do. Good, Nancy? Oh, yes, good job. When you say 16 total new adoptions, are we speaking of units of government?
That's correct.
Okay.
So any of the cities, towns, counties that are in Indiana, they can adopt the Hoosier Start plan.
Excellent. And I certainly enjoy sharing about Hoosier Start everywhere I go throughout the 92 counties and with the cities and towns.
We
So
appreciate that. Now,
I always have a flyer I pass out.
Probably received a few phone calls.
Good, I'm glad to hear that.
But that's all I have to share today.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Good morning. So nice to be with all of you. So I did want to just kind of provide a quick overview. The fund changes that you all voted on in the last committee meeting, they went live last Friday. So we're finished with that. No doubt incident, everything went seamlessly. So happy to see that. And then Kevin mentioned it earlier, the My Interactive Retirement Planner. We have rebranded that to My Income and Retirement Planner. So we keep the same acronym. So, because Merck has been a tool that's been very central to our processes in education over the last, I would say, decade. So this, it's a rebrand, but it is so much more. I would say that it is a major step forward in the retirement planning tool that we're offering to your participants. So I did include the deck that we provide for plan sponsors, but I have a short 2.5-minute video that I want to play that kind of talks about what this new tool does, because it's so much more than what the tool does currently. Here, what do we look like in here?
Hey Tiffany, you know how I've been talking about organizing my finances?
Yeah, did you finally do something about it this time?
Actually, I did. I knew I wanted to save more for retirement, but with so much time in front of me, there's a lot I don't know. I used our My Income and Retirement Planner, and I feel like I have a better handle on things now.
Wait, what's this planner?
Well, it gives you a big picture of your finances and projects, and projects how ready you are for retirement. It's like having a financial coach by your side, intuitive and personalized. It asks you questions and even has interactive what-if scenarios that instantly show how your financial choices could play out.
What if you're not ready to go through all the steps?
The planner's flexible. You can keep it simple or go as robust as you want. Your choice. It's the best of both worlds, financial planning and retirement planning. So it takes everything in your retirement account, all of the details. It allows you to easily consolidate your external assets, your expenses, brings it all together, and then delivers it in a comprehensive financial blueprint. My chance of success score and meter shows how likely my savings will last throughout my retirement, and it allows me to track my progress. I feel so overwhelmed. We have a child on the way. We're gonna have to buy a new home. There's expenses I haven't even thought about yet. The planner helps to manage everything one step at a time with its scenario modeling, outlining each situation and its financial implications.
Does it help with budgeting?
Yes, it can help guide you with budgeting now and during retirement. It generates intuitive graphs based on the information I provide. Then it makes it easier for me to see and make changes each year throughout my retirement journey.
What is the lifetime income projection? What does that show?
It shows how and where your income can come from during retirement. And it has digital coach alerts that help guide you to make your projections even more accurate.
Oh, I can see how increasing my contributions and other changes affect my retirement savings. I'm checking this tool out. I'm convinced. Where'd you find this tool?
It's on our plan website. You just need to log in.
Help your employees take control of their retirement planning with My Income and Retirement Planner, a guided digital experience to help them make positive financial decisions. It's not just about the numbers and charts. It's about their well-being and security for their future by increasing their chance of success. To learn more, please contact your nationwide rep.
Very nice.
So we're really excited about this. It is scheduled to go live on November 21st, so it's very, very imminent. Participants who use the old tool, all of their information will migrate over to the new tool. And basically when they log in for the first time, you just kind of have to go through and verify that everything is accurate. They're going to be able to add so many more data inputs to make their projection even more accurate. Are there any questions about that? Hopefully we'll all log in and try it out once we're going. So, next, we'll talk about the report just briefly because we have a couple of speakers that I want to make sure we will follow the time for them and the questions that we may have there. But if you go to the first tab, plan summary, end of the quarter at $2,151,000,000. We had at the end over the course of that time of $96 million. So it was a very good quarter.
Yes.
So hopefully that continues into the future here. If you go to page Or, our average participant balance, which is something that we take, that we continue to take a look at, is $31,000 as of the end of the third quarter. It was right around 25,000 when we started with the plan a few years ago, so we have been making some progress there. All of the new participants coming in because of auto enrollment at lower, starting at zero, obviously. It is kind of an uphill battle to be able to raise that number. So it's, I think we've done pretty well. The market, of course, has helped a lot with that. But it is something that we're focusing on for our education plans for next year. So we're waiting after this to go through our marketing plans for 2025. And so that's one of the items that we'll be taking a look at. On the next page, page 5, I continue to be blown away by the progress that we're making with the Roth source in the 457 plan. $145 million in Roth. When we started, well, actually, it was the end of 2022, we had $81 million in Roth assets. So significant balance increase there. And we had 6,133 participants in Roth at the end of 2022. Compare that, we're almost 8,000. So the educational efforts that Kevin and his team are doing are really helping to drive that diversification between the two different tax treatments in the plan.
Right.
At the bottom of that page, we do have 7 participants now who are in the self-directed brokerage.
Great.
We kicked off at the beginning of this year. So 6 of those are state employees and 1 is in a subdivision. I'm not sure which one, maybe Sarah knows, but we're continuing to see additional use of that where it makes sense. On page 6 for contributions, just a reminder that this was one of those quarters where we had 7 pay periods in the state rather than 6. So it looks like we had a whole lot more in contributions during the quarter than we did the previous quarter, and that's the reason. And then on page 7, we look at the distributions for the program. We did have a significant uptick in rollovers and transfers out of the program. And that is the other item that we're going to focus on in 2025 is the stay in plan initiative that we'll be talking about as well later today. The other 2 items that I continue to keep an eye on here are the unforeseeable emergency distributions now that they are self-certification. Those have been still ticking up. I'm not sure what point we get to where we want to really take any action on it. I don't think it's it's not out of hand at this point. And then the in-service distributions, we decreased the age for in-service distributions from 70.5 to 59.5. I'm gonna say a couple years ago at this point. And I don't think that that's being abused, so I'm really happy to see that. Because at the end of the day, you want these assets to be there for the participants when they retire. With that, I think that is all that I wanted to cover from the report. Of course, there's a wealth of information here. The state of Indiana, the first tab is just the roll up of all the plans. Then the next tab is just the state of Indiana's deferred comp plan. And then third, what political subdivisions, that is all of the political subdivisions kind of rolled up in total. So the structure of that, and then we also broke it out by 457 plan and 418 plan, so you can see the differences as well.
Quick question on the outgoing, the external payees, Charles Schwab is there. Does that include the Schwab transfers for like the self-directed brokerage?
No.
Or it's external of that? Okay.
No, so that would be only rollovers out of the plan to spin out the.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any questions before I transition to our next speaker?
We have any-
No. We're very fortunate to have with us today Mark Monahan. He's It's been our guide for managed account solutions for as long as I can remember, probably right from the very beginning of when we started operating managed accounts. And we're lucky to have them with us today to go over, do a reminder of everything the service does for participants who choose to enroll in it. And then we also have some performance results to share with you.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for the time this morning. I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be with you all as we talk about, all things retirement plans. This is what I love. I mean, I love helping folks get ready for retirement. So being invited to be here with you all is excellent for me. Great way to spend a Thursday. I'm actually going to flip us to the Pro Account Update tab, which is, I think it's the back of the kit, the nationwide kit. But this is what I'll be covering today. And I know there's a lot in here. Some of it I will go through quickly, but please, at any point, stop me. I'm glad to answer any questions, whether it's here today or in any sort of future forum where I can get you some more details. So, and I just realized as I was sitting here that my page numbers didn't transfer. So if you want to flip over to that first, right, we've got important information, which is our disclosure, echoing everything that we've already talked about. None of this is tax or legal advice coming from us this morning. We're proud to offer you and your participants here all across the state great ways to invest, however they want to engage with us. So when we talk about pro accounts, and I'm going to come back to these kind of segmented groups a little bit later, but when I talk about somebody that's in pro account, that's somebody that's been using the managed account solution for the entire time period that we're discussing when I show you some of that data a little bit later. To help me do it, folks in the middle, they use target date funds for at least 80% of their accounts. Okay, so they're using them pretty close to correctly, if not completely correctly. And then everybody else gets caught in the DIY section, right? Those are the folks that maybe they just invest in one or two funds, or they've only got the fixed, but we'll come back to that. But I want to kind of set the conversation platform that we're going to talk about 3 different types of investors here in your plan. We really do appreciate the opportunity to partner with the entire state, right? The Hoosier Start plan is a wonderful opportunity for your folks to get ready for retirement. There are benefits for your plan to offering managed accounts, right? You have that fiduciary protection through Nationwide for the folks that are using the service. You've got oversight of those managers inside the portfolios by our independent financial expert. When you look at the bottom page that's in front of you, I always like to talk about the unique collaboration that is Pro Account. So Nationwide Investment Advisors, that's us. We are all licensed. If any of your participants call with a question about Pro Account, they're going to talk to somebody that is a licensed representative of NIA, Nationwide Investment Advisors. We're the sponsor and the fiduciary for Pro Account. We make it go. We do all the operations, the trading, the participant communication. That's all done in Columbus, Ohio. Now, our partner with Pro Account is Wilshire. They're what we call the independent financial expert. They're the investment brain of Pro Account. So they do the things like setting the asset allocations, selecting the funds, making changes as participants move through their saving life cycle, nearing retirement, into and then through retirement. So we work together very closely with Wilshire, but they have all of the investment responsibility. We have all the operation responsibility. We don't own them. They don't own us. We employ them. But I want to make sure if anybody ever says, hey, Wilshire to you, you understand exactly what each role is in the solution. So moving on, each participant gets one of 42 portfolios. Each of the portfolios are separate and distinct. There's only 33 on this page here. You see it's a little cluttered if we try to put all 42 in one place. But each portfolio is designed on its own. And as you can see that over on the axis to the left, you see the allocation to equities. That's how much each portfolio has in the stock market, both here and abroad. And then as you follow along from left to right on the bottom on the horizontal axis, you can see the participants getting older, right? As participants get older and as they move toward and into and through retirement, the portfolios de-risk, right? That's an annual process. It's baked into the Wilshire process. We call that a glide path. It works the same as the target date funds do, right? They de-risk as the participant moves toward that target date. What's different, and the first data point that I think is so crucial is that the first level of customization with Pro Account. If you look at the chart at the bottom, I'll call out the 50-year-old, right? And that's me. I turned 50 this summer, so here we are, right? If I'm an aggressive 50-year-old, I have 79% of my account in equities or in the stock market. If I'm conservative, it's only 58%. So that's a meaningful difference as far as how we treat the risk preference of each participant. And you can see, right, each portfolio is different. Each portfolio is specifically designed for that participant. Now, that's the first level of customization. The bottom sheet there, where you see the easy to get started customization for those that want it, this is what we're asking each of your participants for once they engage with Pro Account. We go back to them a couple of times a year with a mailer. Anytime they interact with someone from Kevin's team, we're trying to get them to use that interactive retirement planner tool to allow us to gather more data, 14 total data points that allow us to then customize the portfolios, right? Rather than just age and risk, which will work. But if your participants will share more information with us, we can customize their portfolio even further. We think that's important. And I would like to call out the entirety of the plan for this. Usually we see about 12 to 15% customization, right? We're about just over 1 in 10 participants will act, go in, scan the QR code or interact with us online. As of the 30th of September, 3,531 MERP interactions. So out of the 7,000 or so participants that are using Pro Account, 45% of them have shared the rest of their information with us. That's outstanding. That's almost 3 times the standard or what we expect to see. So your team is very engaged. Your participants are very engaged and are getting the most out of the service that they can, which I really, really appreciate. And of those 3,500, we found 1,848 of the portfolios were updated to give the participant a better chance of success. So what does that look like? That's actually on the next page. So the glide paths are the same, but instead of just having 3 potential solutions for each participant, now we have 9. Right? So we widen out that solution set. And why would somebody move one direction or another? Maybe they're a little bit behind in their saving. Maybe they haven't done as much as they could. Maybe they got a late start. Maybe their pension benefit is not going to be as large as expected. And we need to give them a little bit more risk in their defined contribution portfolio to make up the gap. On the flip side, you might have somebody that's been a really inveterate saver. They're risk averse, but they've got a pension and their spouse has assets. We might be able to move them to what we call the income portfolios, or more conservative than the standard would be for their age. So the full customization is available, but within the guardrails. We would never put somebody in their 50s into a portfolio designed for someone in their 20s. We're not going to do that, but it's all very, very logically designed with guardrails around it. And again, Wilshire behind the scenes doing all of the investment work. There's a quick case study there, the financial planning customization in action. I call this participant Bob just because it makes it easy. The planning engine's goal is an 80% chance of success, an 80% probability of success. Now, when a participant shares with us the rest of their information, that creates a file and it gets sent to Wilshire. It's an anonymous file. It's a data point that we have on the system, but we send that information to Wilshire to see if the participant's portfolio needs to be updated. Now, here's just a quick solution or a quick study here. So Bob's 50. His goal is to replace 85% of his pre-retirement income once he retires. It's the standard across the industry pretty much. But, for example, if you've got grandkids other side of the country, maybe you need a little bit more. Maybe you need 90 or 100% income replacement. The engine allows you to plan for that. That becomes your sort of North Star with regard to the planning. Here's everything else we know about Bob. We know his pension because it's in there. We know how much he earns. We know how much is in his account. From there, the engine decided, well, gosh, Bob is in the moderate portfolio for his age, but over on the right, that only gave him a 74.8% chance of success. When we run the simulations, run the Monte Carlos, assimilate all the data, we realized if we simply move Bob from moderate to aggressive, that moves him to an 81.5% chance of success. Boom, we make that trade. We send Bob a note, a letter, or an email that says, hey, based on the information you shared, we're updating your profile, contact with questions. We're good. So that's, we've had that exact experience with close to 2,000 of your pro account users here in the state. Okay. Questions on any of that?
That's impressive.
I agree. It is what I almost didn't believe the data when it came out as far as how many of your folks are interacting with it. It's excellent. I'm so very, very proud of everybody involved. Far and away the highest I've seen in any of this reporting.
So once a plan member initiates their pro account, that's a one-time interaction where you establish user credentials, right? You enter all your data from external sources. Does the I guess financial planning aspect continue even if that user maybe forgets to update it on a regular basis?
So on the flip side, right, we have 55% of folks that did not come back to us. They haven't answered the emails or the call to action on the QR
Like
code.
up for annual updates?
Correct.
Okay.
So what happens in that case
Mhm.
is they're in that initial anchor portfolio, right? Age and risk.
Mhm.
And then Wilshire is actively managing the portfolio based on those 2 data points. So they're never dropped off or
Gotcha.
the management doesn't stop. Wilshire still continues to watch the markets and make adjustments to portfolios again as participants age, as market conditions change, as managers may fall in or out of favor. That's what Wilshire's doing behind the scenes, is watching all of that, doing all of the analysis and the research so your participants don't have to.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. So, to your point on the next page, that keeps working for participant circle, right? This is the ongoing process. I'm not going to belabor it, but it's not a one and done. This is not a participant electing a single fund or building their own portfolio and forgetting about it. Participant can elect a pro account and forget about it, but we will not. Right? Wilshire's always behind the scenes working, communicating with us as about what changes need to be made, even if it's simply the de-risking of the portfolios every 4th quarter, right? A little bit of risk comes off the table to help get that downward glide path, but that's what's going on all the time behind the scenes. So any more questions on that before I move to the data? And I know we are. I'm going to do my best to be respectful of time. So let's flip past the glossary. And if we can find there's a page that says plan overview at the top and then one that says participant overview. This is the breakdown. Now, this is just the 457 plan data, which we're using as a proxy. It's easier, it's cleaner. But you can see the plan totals over to the left on the overview, the participants in the plan. You can see their average age and their account balance. You can see how they're invested, right? Just shy of 2 average asset classes and about 3 funds is the average investor. Now that's all 3 categories. That's the self-directors, the pro account users, and the do-it-yourselfers, or excuse me, the help me do it. Okay. You can see the breakdown by age group. We've separated it into 10-year age bands. The PRR summary, I'll dive into a little bit more. That's the personal rate of return. That's the actual rate of return from the record keeping system for each participant that we've aggregated and then averaged. We will have a 3-year number for you next year, but I'm going to dive into this a little bit more in a couple of pages as well. Moving forward to the participant overview, this is where we break it down into those 3 categories. You can see that the do-it-myselfers, the help me do it to the pro account users at the bottom or over to the left. This is exactly what we would expect. We expect that the do-it-yourselfers are older, they have larger account balances, and they've been in the plan longer. The help me do it's has a huge spike in count. And to Michael's point before, smaller balances because that's your default, right? That if folks get involved, but they don't make another investment choice, they go to the target date fund. Easy, clean, simple to use. And I would like to call out with the help me do it's, if you look at the bottom there, the average number of funds at 1.02, that's great. Because what you really want is when somebody goes into a target date fund, you want them to be using one fund. You want them just to be using the target date, not trying to goose it with a little extra S&P 500 or putting fixed account in there, right? The target date funds work best as they're designed. So this is great. When you see those numbers creep up to 1.1, 1.2, that might be an education gap we would need to address. but not at this point. And then you see the pro account users, always right in the middle, as far as head count, as far as asset amount, and as far as average age. Your plan is very typical in this way. And then as you can see, we break it down again by average asset classes and average funds held by each age band. Questions on that? All right. In which case I'm going to move forward. If we could skip the quarter to date and go to the 1 year number, we will have a 3-year number for you next spring once we cross that 3-year number. But this is how have each group of folks done, broken down by age category. We've got the average, we have the right, so we have the mean and the median, as well as the 25th and the 75th percentile performance number for each band of participants in each of the different categories. So if you look, the do-it-yourselfers, right, the average return for those that are doing it themselves under 35 is 25.26. Does everybody see that? The similar group of target date users, the mean return is 16.93, and the pro account users 24.81. That's simply the average. When you look at the median, 2 columns to the right, that's the midpoint. So we have half of the folks above the line, half of the folks below that line. And then the great majority of the participants between the 25th and 75th percentiles. So you can see, right, the beauty of the nationwide plan is we have given your participants the do-it-yourself tools to build their own portfolio, whether it's that group of 7 investing in the self-directed brokerage, or some folks we know will drift simply towards a fixed account. We're giving them the tools to be successful and to invest the way they choose. The target date fund users, right? That's the huge preponderance of folks, right? It's the largest group of your participants. They skew younger, they skew smaller balance, but their performance is holding in there. And then the pro account folks, yes, they're paying for this additional service, but they're certainly receiving the value. They're utilizing the solution. They're getting the planning help, right? They're getting the most appropriate portfolio. And the results, I think, show, granted, this is a very short-term look at it. And we never want to get into a solution where we're just, splitting basis points or fighting performance versus performance. But we can be very confident that the folks using pro account are getting the value out of the solution. So I will pause there. I'm looking forward to bringing you a 3-year number next year once we cross that line. But unfortunately, the way the reporting comes out of the system, it's quarter to date, year to date, 1, 3, and 5. So I'll pause for any questions from the committee. Okay. Ladies, anything else from? Excellent. Well, thank you so much for the time and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you.
We are very lucky to have with us today. Also, wow. He's our resident IT cybersecurity professional that one can hire plans and join us today. I am going to share the presentation on the screen. We don't really like hard copies of the cybersecurity stuff out there in the public domain. So I'm going to keep that under wraps for everybody's security. But I'm going to get it hold up here so that Roy can share all of his wisdom.
Wow, you are really not lowering the bar on expectation. So it's nice to see you. My name is Roy Gilliam, like Michael said. So I work for the cybersecurity team within Nationwide. And recently we implemented a model called a business information security office or officer with the intent of which I'm a part, with the intent of working more upstream. Sometimes IT and business, there's a wall. It's various heights, but we don't like that when it comes to security, both from the perspective of making sure we understand what our business partners need, as well as pushing cybersecurity awareness up. So it's a two-way stream. So I do everything from working with developers to ensure their code is secure and talking to wonderful people like yourselves. So my intent with this talk is to take it, we're going to start a little high level, just what we're seeing out there. We have a threat intelligence team that does a lot of good research, and the intent is we need to know what's going out there if we're going to protect our company and our members. And our mission statement is to protect people, businesses, and futures with extraordinary care. And we cannot do that if you don't have confidence in our ability to secure your information. So we take it very seriously. And I apologize, the slides are way far away. All right. That was good view. That was full screen. That was good.
I did something wrong.
All right, next slide, please. Just to anchor really quickly on what cybersecurity means, the first part is probably obvious. The second part may not be. So, oh, go back. I apologize. There you go. So cybersecurity is the art. I can't emphasize art enough. It is not a science. It is not, we can check a box to know that we are secure. I think that applies for everybody, whether it's your personal or the place that you work at. It's a constant dance between the bad guys and the good guys. We have to be right 100% of the time. The bad guys have to be right once. And they're always coming up with new and creative ways, of which some of those I'll get into. But it's protecting the networks and the devices. So the ways that we connect our devices, the wireless or the wired, those devices, whether it's a phone or the laptop, and more importantly, the data that resides on them. And, you know, you see stories all the time in the news about data being exfiltrated. It's very important to protect that data. But then what might not be as obvious is also the practice of ensuring confidentiality. You only see your information when you log into our systems. It has integrity, it's complete, it represents all of your data, and it's available. So that part is usually not typically understood when people talk about cybersecurity. It's usually that first part, but it's all of those things. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so there is a threat landscape. This is what we're seeing across the globe, really. Artificial intelligence is the first piece. I think a lot of you have seen that in the news. That's the biggest, probably up and coming, not up and coming, but that's the biggest threat that's getting better and better. We just a story about the Salt Lake City, the city of Salt Lake, the Salt Lake City Department of Police. Their police chief was recently, they took some of his audio. You know, anybody that's in a public office, you probably have lots of video and audio out there. And they were able to use artificial intelligence and create a scam that was sent out. It sounded just like the chief of police to citizens trying to extort money and scam, and very difficult. They're getting better and better and better. It's estimated that, you know, anywhere from 5 seconds or less can be used to create an avatar that might look and sound just like you. They're not perfect. You can see if you're paying attention, you're like, something's off, but they're getting better and better. And you can be sure in a year from now, they'll be really good. So that is very much a threat that everybody's monitoring. Ransomware is when a bad guy gets in and they lock your systems and they try to extort money from you. City of Columbus recently had that. I feel bad. So at least in the city of Columbus where we're from, there's video circulating of the poor IT guy, many council cycles prior, begging for more money and resources. And then we had this event and now they're giving him like an additional $1 million right away. But it probably cost the city many times more than that. They're still getting the systems back online. So ransomware is a big moneymaker. There's a slide that I'll show about that.
Is this Columbus, Indiana, or?
A city of Columbus, Ohio. I apologize. Yes. Thank you. Unprecedented cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. That's healthcare. That's water systems. China is really, they have a lot of emphasis on this, I believe. It's estimated that they have over 100,000 cyber military dedicated to cyber warfare. Recently been disclosed, like your home ISP, your home internet service provider, you might use to connect. They had kind of spyware in those systems. And I thought maybe the cellular networks would be different. I guess Verizon just announced that they detected China in their systems. Some of our older home Wi-Fi router devices, if you don't keep them updated, they find ways they camp out in there. You know, Roy's 2 cents, not nationwide. I think they're just waiting for an opportune time when they may need to wreak havoc and bring down, you know, a lot of our infrastructure. So that is a big piece. I used to think infrastructure was like Colonial Pipeline was something that was attacked years ago, or water, because they're very old systems, easy to attack, but I think it's much bigger than that. Nation state software supply chain. So software is very rarely built 100% homegrown by the people that do it. We use third-party systems, just like when you're building a car, you don't make the tires. If you're Honda, you buy them from Goodyear, a lot of those components. And the bad guys will find their way into these components. It wasn't necessarily nefarious, but if you heard of CrowdStrike, I don't know if you all were impacted by CrowdStrike. That's an example of supply chain. It wasn't nefarious, but that was a third-party system in your systems that encountered problems. And now, well, guess what? It can bring down. If it was nefarious, that would have been a great win for the bad guys. Kind of an ancillary example is what was happening in Israel with the pagers and the walkie-talkies. Just that's supply chain. That's ways to get into a supply chain. The same thing happens in the digital world when we build applications. Widespread vulnerability exploitation. Vulnerabilities are when bad guys find ways into the systems. And there's a notion of a 0-day vulnerability. And what that means is we discover there's a vulnerability, but the bad guys are already exploiting it. So you have exactly 0 days to fix it. Those are usually the most critical, the ones that get patched. On your device, if you get like an iPhone or Android push, those probably because they discovered there's a 0-day vulnerability, something that needs addressed. So personally, I always, whenever there's an update, I take it. And then finally, geopolitical uncertainty. The world is on fire. The bad guys can use that opportunity, that chaos, any sort of chaos, whether it's chaos from Hurricane Helene in our four walls, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, Israel, they will take advantage of chaotic situations to try to get in. People aren't always thinking clearly if they're in a chaotic situation. And 90% of cyber attacks happen through people, just not thinking, clicking on something, doing something they shouldn't. So that's what we're seeing as far as threat landscape. Next slide, please. And it's a really big impacting business. So 9 billion, it's estimated 9 billion identities within the United States have been impacted. Well, if I think our population is roughly 330 million. So that means it's more than likely your information is out there multiple times. There's a site that tracks your information. You can put in like your home email address. I think I have 33 hits of data breaches over the years where my information has been out there. We no longer can be certain that we need to protect ourselves, and we can say protected. We have to understand that move to an attack angle of our information is going to be out there or already is out there. How can we protect against that being used against us? It's also very big business, $8 trillion in damage. That was last year, probably more this year. It's estimated to grow to 24 trillion. Again, that's an estimate. And the statistic on the right is kind of concerning. It's a very low cost entry if you want to be a cyber criminal. So for $5, you might be able to buy somebody's username and password off the dark web. For a couple $1,000s, you may be able to buy what's called a phish kit. Phishing being sending you an email that looks like a legitimate email, makes you do something you don't want to. Very, very low cost of entry. There's cyber criminal organizations that we don't know what they make, but there's some that we estimate have like $1 billion in revenue. They have very professional services. You can say, hey, I want to attack this entity, this enterprise. They'll provide the systems. They provide a call center where people can call into. They'll do the financial transactions for you. And there's a lot of money in that. A lot of those operate out of, we think, Russia and some of the Eastern Europeans, because they allow them to, as long as they promise not to attack their citizens. So it's kind of a symbiotic relationship. Next slide, please. This one is an eye chart. I really apologize. So we track our threat intelligence team, since we're in the financial services industry. We track what is going on, what the cyber criminals are doing, and formally update this chart twice a year. What this is meaning to represent is across the bottom, or the x-axis, is how capable of a cyber criminal organization is that, left to right. Left is the least capable, right is the most. You might not be able to read the words, but on the right is the Russian flag and voodoo bear. So Russia has a naming convention of anything with a Russian state actor ends in bear. The same thing for China is panda. So they are very capable, but up the y-axis, they're not very interested in the financial industry. They're not interested in making money. They're probably more interested in military concerns. But if you look kind of up in the upper right, those that are capable and interested in financial services, the circle is a spider. That indicates a cyber criminal organization. And those are the ones we try to keep tabs on and understand their tactics, techniques, and procedures. So how are they going about doing what they're doing? What types of attack vectors are they using to get into financial services organizations? How can we be aware of that? And then we have a team that it looks at, okay, we know what they're doing. What does that look like if they were to attack us? How can we see, are we vulnerable? If we are, what do we need to do to close that? And were there any indicators of compromise? And we scour all of our logs to see, was anybody able to get in? So we have multiple teams that are constantly out there just looking for threats and making sure that we stay protected against those threats. Next slide, please. So bringing it back to nationwide, we kind of look at cybersecurity in two buckets. One is products. So on the left side, products, we have threat intelligence. A lot of that first information came from our threat intelligence team. So we have to know what's going out in the world. Going to the right, kind of at 3 o'clock is data protection. We have a team that's just dedicated to data loss prevention, data protecting the data we had, kind of that definition of what is cybersecurity. We have to protect the data and the information on our systems. So we have a team of people, and the product teams have a number of applications, and their goal is to not just install the application and run it. Their goal is to squeeze 90+% of the capabilities out of these. They're focused on this one area so they can be really good at it, so they can squeeze capabilities out of our systems. And so if you look around, I think the other one, cloud and application security, kind of at 9 o'clock, that's how we build our systems. Well, a lot of our systems are in cloud data centers, which a lot of companies use. So what's different about developing in a cloud environment? How can we secure our software? How can we make sure that the things that we do are secure? We have internally developed security software that builds attestations. So when developers are developing their code, we have scans that run to say, does it have any vulnerabilities? If it does, it stops it. If it doesn't, and it goes to production, we have an attestation that that particular code segment was clean when it was deployed, and we can prove that kind of chain of custody, so to speak. So really important work that they're doing. And then on the right, we have services that are kind of cross-cutting. So data and analytics, we are constantly looking at what is our vulnerability posture. There are tens of thousands of vulnerabilities out there. You can't tackle them all. Most of them are small, minor, low likelihood, low risk, residual risk. So we're constantly looking across our vulnerability posture. What's the risk? Assessing the risk. Sometimes things move up and we address them quickly. Sometimes things move down, but we're constantly scanning through our data and analytics. And then further down, consulting and advisory services. That's the group that I come from. So again, we're trying to link what we're seeing, what's best practices, making sure that the developers are aware of what those are and build secure software. And then we're also it's called defense in depth, but you can't just trust one aspect of your security posture. You have to continually think about, it used to be years ago, you have a login and that was your security. And once you got logged in, there was no further protection. Well, defense in depth says that's not okay. You have to continually defend and harden your systems. So we're constantly working across our development teams, our application teams, and even our business teams. Like I said, 90% of cyber issues are caused by people, not ill-meaning people, well-meaning people that just are busy and may not know. So we're constantly doing training and education. We have a robust phishing program. Those emails you get, I'm sure you probably get tested. Yeah. Our open enrollment just started at Nationwide. I'm sure we will see a phishing test with an open enrollment type email to make people click on it. People Nationwide are laughing. And if you fail that, you get additional tests. If you fail it again, your manager now has to go to training with you. And I don't think it ever goes beyond that because that's a very unpleasant for both people. So next slide, please. And just kind of anchoring back to cybersecurity and how do we focus from a retirement solutions perspective. We have over 1,000 people in our security infrastructure organization. This started earlier this year. Prior to that, we had about 300 people just dedicated to cybersecurity in all those different areas. We had an infrastructure team. They were the ones that do the servers and the networks. And we realized that there was a lot in common. And in an effort to reduce friction and kind of lower those walls, we merged those two organizations so that, again, that cybersecurity definition is more than just cybersecurity. It's also availability. So we have about 1,000 people in this organization, and our focus is that definition of cybersecurity. That's what we do every day. We have a 24/7 command center. If you're ever in Columbus, Ohio, you're welcome to come tour. It's kind of cool. It's less cool now that we have hybrid work, but it's kind of like a mini NASA. There's screens on the wall. There's always somebody 24/7, whether they're at home or in the office, multiple people just constantly scanning our networks, looking at threat intelligence, seeing who just got hacked, what things are going on in the dark web. I have a slide about fraud, I think, in here, but our fraud team is constantly monitoring the dark web for checks for a lot of abuse. We have constant surveillance. And then on the right, just ways that we protect our retirement solutions business. So there's call risk scoring. We have artificial intelligence. Again, artificial intelligence isn't bad. It's agnostic. It's how you use it. So we're using it for good, where when somebody calls in, we look at where they're calling from, what time are they calling from, what's their patterns been in the past. And we, when they get to the actual person on the other end of the phone in our call center, there's a score that's associated with that. And that score lets them know, hey, this person calls in all the time. It's the same numbers. This is a safe maybe low friction call, but there's a lot of calls that come in that have risk scores. So they're going to ask additional questions. They're going to be a little bit more skeptical. And it's listening to noise in the background too, using artificial intelligence. And they're trying to beef up their tools to detect those artificial intelligence avatars that might be calling in, pretending to be somebody. The nationwide account lock is similar to freezing your credit report, which I highly recommend. You know, you can lock your nationwide account and no data leaves until you unlock it. That's a good way to prevent fraud. And payment verification. One of many things we do is if money is leaving our system, we make sure it's going to a bank account that matches that user. And if it's not, then that gets flagged and there's additional manual interventions that happen.
May I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Locking your information,
Locking your account, yes.
locking your account.
Mhm.
So could you just say again what you said?
Yeah, it basically prevents the disbursements from happening out of our systems. So you can still go in and use the system. It's not locking you out. It's just saying, I don't want money leaving my system unless I go in and intentionally unlock it. So like I have all my credit reports frozen. There's no reason to have them open 24/7, 365 if you're going to use them once a year. So I go in, I unlock it, I do whatever I need to do and I relock it. It's the same concept. The idea is, it's just an additional security posture against fraud.
I wonder if that's something that we should work on messaging in your meeting coming up. If that might be a point to convey to participants.
Yep. And then at the bottom, Nationwide really cares. And any fraud monies that can't be recovered, we have our Nationwide account pledge that we will make that person whole. Okay. Next slide. I think we're near the end. Oh, yep. Just around cyber fraud. So we have fraud teams on our business that are constantly on the lookout for preventing fraud. But we recently established a cyber fraud team on our cybersecurity team. They are constantly looking for fraud as well from a systems perspective. So they're out there scanning Telegram channels that are bad guys, looking for checks. We have a number of times they've reached out to me and said, hey, the city of so-and-so, we just saw a check. What these people will do is they'll, steal mail, open them up. It looks like a check. They'll post an image and try to sell it to the highest bidder. Well, we have systems and we have applications and tools and products that are monitoring those as well so that we can stay in front of both to protect nationwide checks as well as our plans, in addition to other things. And there's a financial services, this is taking me a minute to this acronym, FSISAC, Financial Services Information Sharing Advisory Council or Committee, I believe. Basically, it's a conglomerate of like JP Morgan Chase, Nationwide, a lot of big financial services agency. And the idea is we're sharing information. And anytime we see a bad phone number, a bad email, somebody doing something bad, we share it to them because, that analogy of like the water, all boats rise. And we're kind of proud of the fact that we're the #1 sharer in that team. We are constantly sharing information. Google admitted us to a program because we saw that most of the fraud attempts were coming from Gmail addresses. So we can send them a dump of Gmail addresses and they immediately disable them because they trust us. They know that what we're doing is they can trust that they don't have to do their additional controls because we're constantly, again, just the relentless effort to make sure it's an art, it's not perfect. People make mistakes. We're not saying we're perfect, but we are very relentless and always trying to make sure that we lower our risk and protect our members.
When you're sharing it, I was just crossing my mind here. Does that include let's say external controls like the FBI? You mentioned big firms. Does the FBI share information?
Well,
I'm just curious.
No, it's a legitimate question. I've heard some of our senior leadership say we absolutely share out with them. We don't always get a whole lot back.
Okay.
To being honest, but we still do our part and we collaborate with them and let them know what's going on.
Yeah. The reason a year or two ago, we had a speaker from the FBI from the cybersecurity.
Yep.
They basically said that a lot of times people don't want to call them if they've been hacked or whatever, for whatever reason, headline risk and all that. But they say you should immediately call us because we might help be able to get some of that money back that you just lost or whatever. But I'm just curious. But,
Yeah. So we absolutely do collaborate with them both locally and globally. Our chief information security officer goes to Washington, D.C. a lot and is on a lot of panels. One of our vice presidents is in the state of Ohio. Mike DeWine has some tabletop exercises he does in the cybersecurity area, and we're involved with those as well. Yeah.
Okay. So
no, it's a legitimate question. We just because you brought it up, I'm very proud moment. We have a number of them, but we had a plane participant in Colorado, and she was in a scam by the FBI. She thought the FBI was calling her, telling her to to kind of liquidate all of her money. So she unfortunately lost a lot of money, but we were able to prevent and protect the money that we had in Nationwide. Like our fraud team called the local police department and had them go visit her and had family go. And she was just convinced. And it wasn't until she had called our call center saying, what's the maximum distribution I can take in one day? And then like minutes later, somebody else called that wasn't her, but said they were wanting that amount. And that was the piece of data we were finally able to mention to her. So, it's not always perfect. It's not always roses, but a lot of those moments, that's again, to protect people, businesses, and futures. That's our mission statement. Yep. And just one kind of maybe more personal takeaways. Use strong passwords at home. I mean, use them at work, but obviously you have your IT policies, but don't repeat the same password. Your information is going to get out there. If it gets out there, you should only have that be impacting that one account. Multi-factor authentication, when it texts you that code to your phone, that's a very important component. Because again, passwords can be known and shared, but a phone is more of who you are. And so that those two things combined create more security. Use a VPN when necessary. So like if you're at an airport or a coffee shop, again, China is out there. Other people are out there. They're trying to watch the traffic that goes across. And if you're just surfing the web, it's no big deal. But if you're doing financial transactions, maybe it is a bigger deal. And that encrypts the traffic. Again, keep your home systems updated. If it's old, I know we don't think about them. They're kind of they just work. My internet works until it doesn't. But, those things get patched regularly and apply updates. And the more recent ones force those, but some of the older ones, you have to do that yourself. And then again, think before you click. Like I said, 90% of cyber events happen because of a person. Again, everybody's busy. It's not intentional. It's not malicious, but it happens. So, always take that minute if something doesn't seem. My track record on our phishing tests at Nationwide is very good, but there's been a couple that I got because I was busy and I wasn't thinking and it looked real and they got me. So I haven't had to go to training yet. That's good. I think that's it.
At least not with your manager.
Right. As far as they know. Yeah, right. Exactly. That would be, especially in my role, that'd be really bad. Anyways, I guess I just want you to walk away with just some information for you, but also just know that we really take this seriously nationwide. Any questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your due diligence on this.
Absolutely.
All right. Next, our investment consultants report with Capital Cities and Susan.
Thank you. We'll start on the considerations and observations page, and I'll just briefly mention, as Michael already did, that the committee voted to simplify the investment menu in August. We eliminated Vanguard FTSE, and that was mapped to State Street S&P 500. We also eliminated American Funds Euro Pacific Growth Fund, and those assets were mapped to Fidelity. Those transitions happened in the first part of November. I also wanted to mention that with the mapping of American Funds Euro Pacific Growth to Fidelity Diversified International, we did meet a break point. So fees were lowered from 56 basis points to 52 basis points.
All right.
And then turning to page 2, we'll take a quick look at the markets. If we look at the equity chart in the middle, all styles were positive across the board on the third quarter. Looking towards the left side of the chart, large cap core, which is the S&P 500, was up 5.9%. Top contributors were Tesla and Meta. On a one-year time period, the S&P is up 36.4%. Moving over to a little bit to the right, to the third blue bar, the weakest performing style for the quarter was large cap growth with a return of 3.2%. Moving over a little further, small cap value was up 10.2%, which was the strongest performing style. And over to the far right, international emerging markets was up 8.7%, outpacing both US broad and developed international. Small cap did outperform large cap, and then value outperformed growth. Looking at individual sectors, real estate and utilities led the way, being up 7.2% and 19.4%. And then over the one-year time period, which are represented by the gray bars, you can see that all styles are showing strong positive returns, with large cap value leading the way up 42.2%. And then looking at fixed income, all styles generated positive returns for the third quarter as rates declined across the yield curve due to the Fed rate cut. The Federal Reserve did decrease the Fed funds rate by 50 basis points in September and then an additional 25 basis points last week. Looking at the individual styles, the Bloomberg aggregate, which is your fourth blue bar, was up 5.2%. And then moving over to the very far right, non-dollar and EM debt were your best performing styles, up 8.6 and 6.2%. And then over the 1 year time period, again, all strong returns represented by the gray bars, with EM debt and high yield the strongest performing styles. And then if we move to page 6, as Michael indicated, we ended the third quarter with nearly 2.2 billion in total plan assets. The target date options represented 23% of plan assets, while the individual options represented 77% of total plan assets. And then looking at the State Street target date funds, the returns ranged between 5.3% and 7.3% for the quarter. And they're up 16.1% to 28.7% for the year. And then if we turn to page 7 for our stoplight grid, all the investment options are in good to excellent standing for the investment policy statement guidelines. We do continue to monitor Fidelity Diversified International and American Funds Euro Pacific International for short-term performance. Obviously, American Funds will come off next quarter then. And then we continue to monitor T. Rowe Price Blue Chip Growth for long-term performance. Are there any questions at all on the report that we could answer?
Thank you very much. Thank you. With that, is there any old business? Hearing none. New business.
So for new business, we have in the back pocket of your report, sample investment policy statement guidelines. We have a number of items on the agenda for next quarter. We wanted to give you a preview of an amendment we'd like to make to the investment policy statement. So if we turn to just the very back page of that stapled copy. Basically, what we've done under the responsibilities section for the committee members is just add some guidelines pertaining to the fact that non-financial factors will not be taken into account when we're designing the investment menu or monitoring those investment options. So we will look to incorporate that in the February discussion, but wanted to go ahead and give you the full quarter to review those new, the new language. Very much look forward to that discussion in February. We also have the fee analysis and our annual market review on the docket for next quarter as well.
Thank you very much. Any comments there at this point? Okay, great. I would also like to thank our acting budget director, Joe Hagan, for your service on this committee for 5 years now.
5 years for mine.
As an appointee from the governor. Thank you for your dedicated and diligent service and for the contribution that you have brought to the review of all things very important for the benefit of the plan.
Thank you. I do appreciate that. I think I told Stacy this last time. I mean, of all the boards and commissions that I'm on, this is a very well-run one, very professional, very well organized, and the people make that happen. So thank you for our consultants and our administrators and recorders. So it's been great being on the committee and an honor to represent not just Hoosier retirees, but also those that are planning for retirement like myself. So yes, thank you.
Thank you for your service again.
And Joe, if you don't mind, when's your last day and where you headed?
So I am, yes, last day will be December 20th. And then I am heading to Ivy Tech to be one of their vice chancellors of finance. So, yeah.
Congratulations.
With that, do we have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
So moved.
And a second?